My feelings about the Obi-Wan Kenobi show are complicated. It has some really high highs but some terribly low lows. It's littered with problems that are easily fixed, and has characters shoved into the plot that really don't belong there. So today we're taking a look at the good and the bad to determine if this is a win or a failure for Star Wars. The biggest problem that stood out to me on the second rewatch was how artificially integrated Reva is into the story. She is not included here in service of the story, she's included here to give her a spin-off at a future date. I mean, just looking at the premise alone, there is no need for a third villain. You already have Darth Vader, the Grand Inquisitor, and honestly, if you really want to stretch it, since, Obi-Wan Kenobi is a pretty major Jedi, you could even say Palpatine's involved. Everything Reva does in this story, except for one instance in Episode 5, could be done the exact same by the Grand Inquisitor, who is, though it is a subjective opinion, far more interesting than Reva. The fact that for Reva to make sense in the story at all, they had to fake kill off the Grand Inquisitor and then revive him and expose the fake out in the same show shows that there was no room in the timeline to put another villain here. And what makes it even worse that this non-compelling character is forced into the story is that 90% of the show's plot holes revolve around her. Not even getting into the fact that the characterization doesn't work well, but so many plot holes are here that don't make sense. For instance, there is really no reason for her to think that kidnapping Bail Organa's daughter would draw out Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan has been hidden for 10 years and ignored every bad thing happening to the Jedi in the galaxy since then. And learning that Bail Organa was a co-worker of Obi-Wan Kenobi a decade ago is not a proper justification to really think he would come out of hiding. She just got extremely lucky that Obi-Wan Kenobi happens to be sworn to protect Leia and Luke. Another big problem is how poorly they utilize her mind reading in the show. She interrogates a lot of people, like it starts on Tatooine when she's interrogating Owen. She even cuts off a woman's hand, demanding to know where the Jedi is, and she really thinks he knows something, and then she does not mind read him. It's like, why even go down a line of questioning if you can just examine what he's thinking? And she does this again later. She's interrogating Leia, for some reason, even though that doesn't make sense, and we'll explain why. And she doesn't even try to mind read her until 3/4 of the way into the episode. All you would have had to do to, partially fix that sequence is have her do that right off the bat and then have the rest of the episode happen after that, as now she has to interrogate her because she can't read her mind. And then again, later in the same exact episode, Tala approaches her with fake information to distract her, and Reva is immediately suspicious, and still does not mind read her. And going back to what we were just talking about, interrogating Leia on Nora does not make any sense whatsoever, because as it's been established, you are the only reason she was kidnapped. You kidnapped her and forced her to interact with the Hidden Path, which she was with for less than 1 day, and you think that she's going to have any sort of information about where they are? She has no ties to them other than the one tie that you put her in, and she's interacted with them honestly less than a day. She was with Obi-Wan for a day, and then she was with them for 2 hours max. Reva has no reason to think that she would actually know anything about them. And Episode 4 is just a giant plot hole, and I really wish it wasn't in the show because it's a bottle episode as well. But the end of that episode has another giant, not plot hole, but just makes Reva look really dumb. Because she tells Vader when he's all up on her about failing, she says, I put a tracker in the droid to track where they're going because Kenobi is all that matters. If Kenobi is all that matters, why would you, say that you let them escape when you had him and a Hidden Path operative captured? If catching Kenobi is a priority and the Hidden Path is the second priority, you already have everything you need. You have Obi-Wan Kenobi right there for Vader, and you can read the mind of Tala, which will inform you of where the Hidden Path are going. And that's another great offender in Episode 4 of wasting time. You only have 6 episodes with Obi-Wan and Vader, and you've wasted one of them basically rehashing the mission from Jedi Fallen Order when all the characters end up in the spot that they were at before this episode started. Obi-Wan and the Hidden Path are running from the Empire, who's right on their tails. And it's just such a shame that they wanted to go this direction, because I feel it would have been so much more fulfilling and entertaining to see another episode, like episode 5, where it revolves around a flashback between Anakin and Obi-Wan as they play this like mental chess game against each other. I mean, this show really squanders its potential to tie into the Clone Wars and to do things with Hayden Christensen, who's barely in the show, even though he absolutely kills every performance he gives. I mean, one of my favorite touches of the show is when Vader knows Obi-Wan is in the village, so he just starts killing civilians because he knows Obi-Wan will not ignore all these people dying and he will come face him because of it. Using that kind of past knowledge of each other to outwit each other over and over was the most appealing part of the show. And it's a shame we had a whole episode taken away from us that could have given us more of that great chemistry to send Obi-Wan on a side quest. And again, even in one of the show's best episodes, episode 5, Reva drags down the whole thing again. They have a really good plot progression in that episode going on where Obi-Wan is outwitting Vader by turning Reva against him. But they waste this because Reva attacking Vader happens after Obi-Wan has already escaped. So it has absolutely no bearing on the plot. It would have been so easy just to make her swing at Vader when he's pulling down the ship. And Obi-Wan can be on the ship he's actually pulling, and that makes him drop him. And lets Obi-Wan get away and makes it feel like Obi-Wan really outplayed Vader here. And also by framing this sequence like that, it ruins the only redeeming factor of Reva's character. Her whole thing was she hates Obi-Wan and she's hunting him to where she can present him to Vader, thus getting closer to Vader so that she can kill him for what he did at the temple. But that all falls apart if you think about it. She's done all these awful things. She has been hunting him relentlessly just for this, just so she can become the Grand Inquisitor and get close enough to Vader to strike. And for her big attempt at treachery to be, I yelled at him and then swung a sword at him, after all this planning, makes her look really stupid. And then, once she is defeated by Vader in what is, again, one of the best fights of the show, we see the Grand Inquisitor has somehow survived his lightsaber stab to the chest, which, again, makes no sense even though we all knew it was going to happen. And they try to play it as this great twist, but it just makes you think, it's like, wait a minute, so we took him out of the show to give her this dumb assassination attempt, essentially, just to put him back in after. So you essentially pushed a much more interesting villain away to give her this one part of the plot, which doesn't even make sense. And then, to make matters even worse, Vader stabs her in the chest, and she survives for no reason narratively. You know what I mean? The thing about character fake-outs is like Darth Maul getting chopped in half and dropping down a reactor shaft and surviving is absolutely ridiculous. But the payoff of Maul's character that we got out of that is kind of worth turning a blind eye to the plot, you know? But what do we get from the Grand Inquisitor fake death and from Reva's fake death? From the Grand Inquisitor, we get a less interesting villain for 3 episodes, and that's it. And for Reva's fake death, we get her role in episode 6. And her role in episode 6, again, makes no sense. She hears the communicator where Bail Organa's left a message for Obi-Wan Kenobi that says, I fear he's found out about the children, I worry for your safety, something about Owen. And she somehow takes this knowledge as, oh wow, I should kill these kids to get at Darth Vader, which makes no sense. First off, even if you could deduce from that message that these are Vader's children, killing a son that Vader doesn't know even exists is not going to hurt Vader. You're just going hunt this random kid for absolutely no reason. And then this is framed as her not doing it as some sort of redemption after all the awful things she has done throughout the show. And she walks off to go get her potential spinoff, which probably won't happen now because of the poor reception of her character. But on top of her just not being a good addition, they use this awful chase sequence where she essentially gets beaten up by a bunch of farmers as like a cutaway from the best lightsaber fight in 15 years. You know what I mean? We are cutting away from the grand finale of Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Vader to look at this scene of creeping around a farm that has absolutely no tension, because we know that Owen, Beru, and Luke all survived this, with Luke having no recollection this even happened, so clearly nothing impactful can happen in this sequence. So why are we cutting away from the best part of the show to cut to this? You know, in Revenge of the Sith, they cut away from Obi-Wan and Anakin's fight on Mustafar to cut to Yoda and Palpatine's fight on Mustafar. There's characters with a lot of history and emotional connections, and you're cutting from a very high-intensity scene to another high-intensity scene. You're not taking a break from a grand finale to basically waste time like you are here. And to close off with my problems of Reva as a character, the acting for her is very inconsistent. It is not always bad, like some people have said. Her acting in the Owen interrogation scene is pretty bad, but her last scene on the show where she's crying in the desert to Obi-Wan is actually pretty moving. But she's also given a lot of really bad sequences, like the parkour chase scene where she's doing backflips as she climbs over buildings for no reason. Is pretty terrible. And from the get-go, she just does not come off as intimidating or scary or like something Obi-Wan Kenobi would ever not be able to handle. I mean, personally, I have a hard time believing Obi-Wan Kenobi would even struggle against the Grand Inquisitor. Maybe if him and 2 other Inquisitors are with him, then they'd be a threat, but that would at least be a little more believable than this. Now, to move on to something more positive about the show, because the show does have a lot of positives despite its many problems. Leia's inclusion here is great. It's definitely a surprise, but a welcome one. While I would change the justification for her getting kidnapped, I would make it to where Bail Organa's daughter got kidnapped because he speaks out against the Empire, so maybe the Empire took her to shut him up, and that's why Obi-Wan has to go save her, and then the Empire catches on to Obi-Wan during that. He gets exposed. I think that would easily set up the same plot, basically, without it being contrived. But I absolutely love Leia's inclusion here. I think it makes perfect sense to me that this is the only thing that would make Obi-Wan leave Tatooine, especially considering the state of mind he's in, where he's letting other Jedi die rather than help them, and he's clearly devoted to Luke and Leia, and Bail Organa comes to beg him. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And the great relationship between Leia and Obi-Wan is just fantastic. It improves A New Hope retroactively, which I'm always a fan of doing, and it just makes Obi-Wan's death feel more meaningful in that movie, as he had a relationship with both of these children, and now he dies finally seeing them brought together. On top of that, they just did a great job writing Leia as a child, you know? She's a little bratty, she's stubborn, and she's arrogant, but it never hits a point where you feel like she's unbearable or unlikable. Every time it creeps to that, the show brings us back with a heartfelt moment that shows that she's just a kid, you know? Where the weight of her actions really hits her, and she gets sad and she misses home, and it's just extremely well done, and the chemistry these 2 actors have, her and Obi-Wan, is just amazing. I only have 2 complaints with this character. It's the initial chasing where she gets kidnapped is, you know, it's a meme, it's terrible. And I think she should have left the show after episode 3, because something I didn't mention about, you know, Reva's plot holes is that Leia is escaping through the tunnel in episode 3, and Reva magically appears on the other side, and she gets captured again. I think what they should have done is have Leia make it out, and while Obi-Wan goes to distract Vader and all of them, and they're all in Obi-Wan, Leia gets away, and she's off the show. Because you don't need her there anymore for the plot, essentially. You know, the Empire's already on to Obi-Wan, and the rest of the show can be him trying to escape and helping the hidden path. And then you can still have that scene at the end of the show where he goes to Alderaan and he talks to her, and it's nice and cute. Other than that, though, she's done really well here. And getting into the main character of the show, Obi-Wan is just portrayed perfectly. Ewan McGregor steps right back in like he never left. And the writing around Obi-Wan is also fantastic. You see him in the headspace you really wanted to see him in this show. It's like a dark, gritty take. He's lost hope. He's lost faith in himself as a Jedi. And he really feels there's nothing left to life except to watch over Luke. You see him tormented from the very first episode. He's haunted by Anakin and by the things he's had to do and his failure as a master. And his progression over the show into stepping into the shoes of his old self is very gradual and natural, and it doesn't really hit you over the head with it until the last episode. And by that point, it's earned, because you've seen, as the show progresses, he slowly starts using his lightsaber more. Every action scene just shows him being more capable, more aware of his surroundings. And then when you see him in episode 5, essentially being a general again, as he defends this, fortified unit against the Empire's advances. And by the end of the show, he's arguably hit the most powerful version we've ever seen of Obi-Wan. And his confrontation with Vader, him getting burned just like he was, really strengthens their rivalry. And of course, that last lightsaber fight scene in the show, I would argue, kind of makes the whole show worth it. I mean, that is the best choreographed fight we've got in a very long time. The score is great. The setting, the acting, and chemistry is great. And to see him break Vader's mask just like Ahsoka did, and it not be enough to draw him out, is just so good. And seeing Obi-Wan cry at seeing Anakin's face, and seeing the monster he really is, and apologizing for it, is just so beautiful. And to see him kind of get what he needs from Vader when he says it's not your fault, And that scene is really up for interpretation on, if it was Anakin or Vader the whole time. I think I choose to interpret it as Anakin came through for a second and then realized to twist it and make it evil, pretty much. And they even fixed that one little nitpick line from A New Hope when he calls him Darth, and they made it something so deep. And that's just the best kind of retroactive fix you can do. I love that stuff. I mean, the only thing I've really watched from the show since it came out is looking at YouTube clips of that last fight. It's just so phenomenal, and that last conversation with them. It's one of the best scenes in Star Wars, hands down. The only thing is, I wish they had found a way to naturally integrate Qui-Gon, at least for half an episode of this show, I mean, I really feel like we should have got more than 2 lines with him if they were going to go to the trouble of bringing Liam Neeson back. The other character done absolutely perfectly is Darth Vader, and that's honestly the biggest praise I can give the show, is they took both these legacy characters who have had, 50 years of appearances now, and they did them perfectly. There's nothing I would really change about how either of them act in this show. And it really just speaks to the care everyone has treated these characters with, that in 50 years, Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi have never had a bad appearance. And to see both of them at a power level that you really couldn't pull off back in the day of the original trilogy, and to get to see Vader just go as hard as he can possibly go in this show is fantastic. It just makes you fanboy out. I mean, he's competent, he's threatening, he's menacing, and he's completely brutal and ruthless. It's the perfect representation of him. And then you get to see the humanity under the mask at the end of the show that ties the whole character together. It's just everything you could want from a Darth Vader appearance is here. And we get just such cool visual representations of both of them. We get to see Vader suit up with the theme playing in the background. And I would argue in episode 5, Kenobi's new robes are the best look this character has ever had. And the absolute best part of the show is the relationship they have, and seeing them outwit each other, seeing them understand each other and use that to beat each other is just fantastic. And I think the show would have been much more well received if it focused on that primarily. I think from episode 3 onward, every episode should have been structured like episode 5, with a flashback between them that shows how it relates to the current struggle they're in, and it shows one of them beating the other by using that knowledge. And that would be a natural way to incorporate more prequels flashbacks. Maybe you could even bring in Natalie Portman and have Obi-Wan gain some insight from a conversation she had with her about how to beat Vader, or something like that. The only major issue that really took me out of it was during the burning scene, when they just established that Vader can throw Kenobi around like a rag doll from across that pit of fire. And then Tala starts the fire again, and Vader just acts like he can't, easily yank Kenobi to the other side. And that's the kind of tiny thing that really frustrates me, because all you would have to do to fix that is, let's say you just write it to where there's a crane hanging in the middle, and Tala shoots it and blocks the line of sight, and then sets off a fire. And then Vader's distracted, Obi-Wan gets away, But it just feels so contrived, like Vader let him escape, and it makes him look incompetent. And that's honestly the only moment I had a problem with for either of these characters. And that's the kind of thing that bothers me, because it's so incredibly easy to fix. The fact they let that be in there is just lazy. Another character who is somehow done really well here, despite looking terrible, is the Grand Inquisitor. I mean, the effects for him are so bad. It is such a far cry from what they were able to pull off with this species all the way back in 2005. And I know some people have defended it, saying, he has a big role, so they can't really do that with the effects and make it look real. But I would argue he doesn't have a big role, I mean, they pretty much wrote him out of the show, and all he's given to do is some monologues and slowly walking towards people. But however, despite the bad effects, he is done perfectly. His voice is amazing. The monologues that are written for him are amazing. He still looks pretty scary, even though it's a far cry from how he should look. And he's just intimidating from the get-go. It's so much fun to hear him talk. He reminds me of Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. He's just captivating when he's in a scene. And he has some of the best roasts in the show by far. The only problem I have with him is the way he's implemented, because, again, it really makes no sense. I mean, when he betrays Reva at the end and reveals he's alive, and he says, "Your rage was useful, now it's tiresome." That makes no sense to me, because she wasn't useful. She did nothing that he could not have also done in the plot, so that's pretty contrived. But the actual performance and the lines he's given are fantastic, start to finish. Now, as for some of the side characters, Tala is pretty compelling. I actually really like her. And when she explains how she got hooked up with the Empire and then realized what she was doing, it really fleshed her out well for having such a minor role. And her death hit me pretty hard. I actually was pretty emotional in that scene. She did a good job. Again, other than episode 4, with the terrible trench coat scene where Obi-Wan literally puts Leia under his coat and just walks around a crowd of 100 stormtroopers. Nobody notices. That's pretty awful. But, that's not her or Obi-Wan's fault. It's kind of a plot thing. But her portrayal was really good. The actress did a good job, and I liked her. Haja was the scammer who instantly turned to Kenobi's side for some reason. And he was acted well and he was funny, but I really do not buy that he goes from scamming everybody to 20 minutes later defending Obi-Wan and becoming a hero, basically. I think that's kind of ridiculous. But he was entertaining to watch, and he had such a minor role that it's not a big deal. And the other main side character is the Hidden Path leader, Roken, who I really don't have an opinion of because he's not given much to work with, but we could see him in something down the line and perhaps they can flesh him out a bit. He seems like a good groundwork for a new character, so we'll see. Bail Organa's done really good. I like his argument with Obi-Wan at the beginning of the show, and I like the chemistry he has with Leia. It kind of reminds me of Owen. Owen does a great job in this show, too, even though it's a little ridiculous that he, beats up an Inquisitor pretty easily as a farmer for most of that fight. And his relationship with Kenobi is very good, and they really flesh him out with how much he cares about Luke. It's nice to see. And yeah, that's basically why it's such a hard show to wrap my head around, because the things that don't work really don't work and are just awful. But the things that do work are things we've been waiting to see for 15 years, that Obi-Wan Vader confrontation, both of them are very good. Obi-Wan's character arc is amazing in this. Seeing Vader get his mask torn off in that confrontation is just so good. Owen and Luke are done well. Leia's done fantastic. But, man, Reva hijacking the show just kind of ruins it, It doesn't help also that Fallen Order had kind of pretty recently done a very similar character to this in Trilla way better. So I think that's also where these negative comparisons come from. But man, it really drags down the show. But at the end of the day, I think I am happy it's a part of Star Wars. I mean, if I could erase this show from being created, knowing we'd get another attempt to make one, then I probably would, just because I think they could do much better than this and all these very simple mistakes could be fixed. If I could, I would also make it a movie. I think it's very obvious the structure of this story works better in a 2.5-hour movie than 6 episodes. But on the whole, if I would erase this knowing we wouldn't get another attempt at this, I don't think I would. I think the highs of this show make it worth being there. Make it worth accepting in the Star Wars timeline. Because you get some really good character moments that improve the originals and flesh out the prequels a little bit more too. And to see more of Hayden Christensen, more of Ewan McGregor is just always such a plus. And I think when you factor in the positives with the negatives, it's still worth being there. It's still worth a watch. And though it could and should have been done way better than it was, I am glad to have it as part of Star Wars in the long run. And with all that said, though with reluctance, I do have to accept Obi-Wan Kenobi as official headcanon. Thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy this discussion, please drop a like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments. I mean, do you agree? Do you really like Reva? If so, I'm always willing to hear others' opinions. Please let me know, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.